It's coming along. We put, I think, about 20 up. There were some old ones there from as early as middle 2016. And there's probably another half a dozen or more ready to be uploaded. And so the 10 or so that were already there, plus the 20 or so that have been uploaded, plus a half a dozen more, that's putting it up, getting it pretty close to 40 videos online.
Are you editing them at all?
No editing. Absolutely raw. However, if someone wants to edit, the right thing to do is to download the video that they want to edit it, and then give it to either Noah or myself. And then we can replace the unedited one with the edited one. Mm-hmm. I don't think anybody wants to do that. Maybe years from now, when there's no more videos done and they actually look like they're valuable, so long as they're putting a bunch of them on, they're worthless. Like the
right. But, further down the road, just like Bhikkhu Buddhadasa stuff, people will go back and say, hey, there was a really good talk, or we had a good discussion about this. I wonder if we have a recording. They go and hunt down the recording and then write it up and write it often and bang, you have a new text.
I would say that somewhere after about 1970, that every public talk that Bhikkhu Buddhadasa gave was recorded by someone in Thai, which means it's available to you and Thai people and others who speak Thai, but it's, he spoke adequate English. He spoke it well enough, to understand nuances, and he understood it well enough to speak in Thai, have Santikaro translate into English, and then Bhikkhu Buddhadasa corrects him, saying, no, that's not the right translation. You missed the point. And in that regard, if that's possible, I would say that, in fact, translating an old master on the fly like that is probably the very best way to learn the Dhamma. And that it fits the definition of Socrates' definition of what is learning. Hearing something, even if you hear it over and over and over again, is not learning. It's only when you can reproduce it. And in the reproducing of it is the learning process. And he figured that out about the same time that the Buddha was around. And if you think about it, that's correct. That until, even if we hear things, we might be able to repeat it inside the mind and start laying the foundation, but it's only when we can express it. And this is one of the reasons why, of the 5 ways of learning the Dhamma, teaching the Dhamma is the highest. It's the last on the list, and it's the most important. This is one of the reasons why Bhikkhu Buddhadasa and Ajahn Po encourage people to teach, because that helps cement for themselves what they know. Especially if they're like I am and are afraid of making a mistake. And so we make very sure that what we're saying fits in with the Dhamma. But that also, that surety is part of becoming the lion. That you know what you're saying, and you know it to be correct. You know it to be correct for the following reasons. One is that your teacher has heard you say it and agrees with it. And that happens actually quite often in the suttas, where the Buddha will put one of the monks on the spot to teach. He did it with Sariputta. He did it with Ananda. Yes, I just clearing my throat to say it. Ananda. And he also would do things like having senior teachers around and then give a very, very short talk and leave.
That's what I was going to say. Quite often he would give the summary version. Monks would listen, and because they were trained in the training of the day, they could remember what was said, right? Perhaps the Buddha said a verse or something that's easy to memorize, and because they were just good at memorizing, they could memorize it, and then they'd go and say, Mahakasapa, the Buddha said this, we don't understand it. And he says, well, did you ask him? No, well, you should have asked him. Well, he's not around right now. Can you explain it? Okay, friends, I'll explain it, and then he explains it, and so forth.
And then, at the end of the sutta, then they all go to the Buddha
and say, right,
to verify that it's correct.
And
almost as if this is a setup, because I know of at least 4 suttas that follow that exact sequence of events.
Yeah, I can think of several off the top of my head.
Okay, so in that regard, the teaching of the Dhamma is the top on the list. The first one is merely hearing the Dhamma.
I was going to say, I'm going to make a guess. Is it maybe first is hearing, second is remembering, maybe third is understanding? I have no idea what
Practicing. Yes, practicing. Figuring it out for yourself. The fourth one then is the insight of seeing it for yourself. And then the fifth one is knowing it well enough to teach it. So the really knowing it is the hard part. In fact, one of the reasons why it took a while to get back in touch with you is I was talking to a guy who is going through what can be misconstrued and labeled as the dark night of the soul. However, when we use that term, we kind of get the idea that we know what we're talking about. Do you know what I'm talking about when I say the dark night of the soul?
I'm familiar with discussions about it in the Insight community.
Yes, okay, so I wouldn't say that the dark night of the soul is an appropriate word to use, that normally happens to Christians because they've got a soul to have a dark night. However, it does have some value to it, and that, are you familiar with I think it was Ledi Sayadaw that actually wrote it, but it came popular within the Western community through the Burmese. It's called The 16 Stages of Insight.
Yes.
Okay.
I've read those. I asked you about them a while back, but I think your answer was more or less that don't really worry about it too much.
Well, that's probably the right way of doing it. The 16 stages of insight, that's just simply the wrong statement, is correct. But the descriptions that you find online in English to define and describe what these 16 stages are on was done by people who haven't gone through the stages, and therefore there's some mistakes to be made. That's true in all literature, in fact, in that regard. um, that the scholars are more interested in more and more and more scholarship rather than deeply understanding what's being discussed. And so that's one of the problems with translations. That if a monk or a layman who were doing translations would do one translation of one sutta and spend 10 years really making sure that he understood what he was translating, then he could go at a lickety-split rate through the rest, through a few more suttas, because he's got it. But what happens instead is that people translate without a clue about what they're doing, in the sense that they don't know the topic. It would be like, here's an example, translating a physics book from German to English, done by someone who was had a master's in English as a second language, but had no degrees in physics or even elementary mathematics. All right, about the best he could do with any math that's in the book is just give it 1-to-1. But almost all the time, that math has a description along with it, and if the guy doesn't understand the math, then his translation of the description is going to be wrong, possibly something wrong on every page. This is exactly what happened with I.B. Honer and Riles Davies. They weren't Buddhist. They certainly weren't noble. And yet the entire Pali Text Society and the translation is built upon the work of I.B. Honer and Riles Davies. Isn't that amazing? I wonder how many Christians would accept the Bible that was translated out of whatever old languages there were by people who had actually no interest in Christianity at all. I wonder what kind of translations those would be. But the amazing thing is that they would certainly be different from the translations that the Christians are using nowadays. So, this is one of the big problems, and is one of the reasons why students like yourself should spend time in the suttas, going over the English language translation, sometimes getting them as close together. Sometimes I can get 2 or 3 translations side by side and the Pali to figure out which one of them is doing the best translations. In fact, on the Sutta Central, Subharo is the one who provides his translation, not Subharo, Subhatu, translates, and that he seems to be a beginner, but I really enjoy the fact that he puts the Pali, or allows it to be seen line by line, so that you can actually see what's going on with the Pali. And that seems to be the best way to learn it, is by questioning the translations as you go through.
That's why I often like to read the Pali texts in their Thai translation, because the Thai translations are very free with using Pali loanwords. In the whole Dhamma language, they don't translate it.
Well, they don't even translate it because, in fact, if you look at it over the centuries, how much Pali languages, especially vocabulary, has crept into the Thai language to the point of supplanting the original whatever Chinese dialect words that there were. Did I tell you about the society that's in Yuan province of China? They call themselves Dai, and that their language is so close to Thai that the Burmese who speak Thai can understand and they can communicate with each other? That this must be the place where the Thai language came from. It's because the Thai language still exists in China. But the reason that it's a bit different
from Chinese, but they do believe that the original Thai language from southern China.
You're breaking up. Can you repeat your last
Yeah.
couple sentences?
I said, from my study of things, I believe that the Thai language family originated in southern China, although it's not a direct descendant of Chinese. It's kind of its own separate thing.
The word that I have heard for it was actually Proto-Chinese. And what they mean by Proto-Chinese is that the Thai language is very close to what Chinese language was a long, long time ago. That Thai or the Dai language is actually kind of a more ancient version than Mandarin, which is the Chinese language that it's closest to. I actually was quite surprised when I was in Singapore buying some computer stuff and listening to the merchants who were speaking Chinese, which was Mandarin, and I actually understood part of what they were saying, especially when it came to the numbers. They use, 486.
Yeah.
What, the processor that, before the i7, they called them 486, I think was, what they were calling it. And so those numbers were actually recognizable. And
The
so
numbers are the same.
Yeah. And so I started to listen very closely to recognize that Mandarin is actually close enough to Thai that you can see they're in the same family. They're both tonal languages having 5 tones. And we've already talked about the society of Thai is very Confucian. It's not Buddhist at all. So the Thai is a Confucian society, a network. And in fact, the Chinese government and the nation and the country of China now is still a Confucian government, and it seems to be working pretty well. Bhikkhu Buddhadasa wrote a book on Dhammic socialism where he actually prefers to have a benevolent dictator. And that seems to be what China has. And part of what makes a benevolent dictator benevolent is he's afraid of the people. And so, naturally, that's kind of strange to the Western ear who's been trained on democracy, Now democracy is being seen that it might not have as many benefits as they were talking it up. I think, in fact, the Yay Yay Democracy campaign was a result of World War II.
Mm-hmm.
Of America being great, or whatever like that. So, with the concept of a society being Confucian, that kind of society. Here's an interesting point: that when the Chinese riot or demonstrate, they almost always demonstrate against the local government, as opposed to the federal government. They don't have a federal government, but they operate very much like one. So that the Chinese authorities in Beijing appoint the governors and the local officials. And so if anything goes wrong in that province, then the local people will not only demonstrate against the local officials, they'll complain to Beijing, please help us. And so Beijing lines up as this kind of a super authority like that. It's all very convenient. Seems to be working in several good ways in China.
Yes.
One of them is the greening of the deserts. They're beginning to take back over the Gobi Desert. This year was the first year that desertification in China was actually reversed. They've been working on it for a long time, but they're actually reversing it. Another one is the Silk Road project and the one road which is actually built in the fear that the U.S. and the allies will prevent China from being able to have an open sea. And so they're going overland. That's very, very interesting. The other one is the solar world that's growing up. So the greening of China, as well as the taking the pollutions out. The China definitely number world leader in several industries in that regard.
Of the installed capacity for solar power production, China has 80% of the entire world's solar power. Just as a single country. And then Asia has almost all of the rest, and there's a tiny fraction that's spread in other continents. The U.S., I'm not even sure if the U.S. makes 1%.
3 now. However, guess where all of that Chinese stuff came from? Was from the money of Germany, because Germany fully realized that they're either going to be no energy at all or dependent upon Russian, or they're going to have to do something on their own. So it was actually a German-Chinese cooperation, because Germany really needed to do it. They were feeling, and are, even nowadays with Trump in office, really feeling the pain. And so, in fact, Germany is even more solar developed than China. But meanwhile, China had so much excess capacity at one time that they were selling the whole system dirt cheap. And their best customer at that time was, I think, the UAE. And so there's an entire, I think it's around Dubai, and that is such a big thing. And the other thing that they're doing in that area is doing farming and growing deserts. So here's the system. They put in salt water into huge corrugated cardboard systems for the air to flow through, creating a lot of water vapor. So that's how they're cooling it. This water vapor cooled air is then fed into an enormous tent that is plastic sheeting. An enormous one. Inside there, now they're setting an environment for growing plants and things like that. They're messing with the soil and whatever like that. But the really surprising part is that this, you know what a Quonset hut is?
No.
It's a building that just goes around like in a curve. It uses parabolic, or it's actually just an arch. Can be constructed out of aluminum with almost no frame at all.
Okay.
Or very, very little frame. Okay, so the frame of the building is like that, and so all of this condensation of the water that goes into this building then drips along the side and collects it as fresh water. And it is, I mean, they're hundreds of hectares. Really enormous. And in fact, I think the project is called the regreening of the Sahara, that the intention is to do this in the Sahara. But meanwhile, there is a 15-kilometer wide green belt that's being built right across the southern part of the Sahara. And that Senegal, for instance, has already finished theirs. The entire nation, 15-kilometer wide green belt to stop the desertification from proceeding south. But not only that, but inside this 15-kilometer green belt, the grass is growing, the crops are growing, they're reclaiming the desert. And so within the next year or so, all world desertification will be starting to be, not just starting to be reversed, will come to the point that it's zero growth. And now they'll start to be not just reclaiming deserts as an idea, but they're actually reclaiming the deserts worldwide. They're doing it in Australia, and the first place that they really got going was in Israel. So Israel
Yeah.
is now teaching the rest of the world how to do many things. Plus, they've got some really interesting products. One of them looks like a wash tub that's got a very specific top surface that traps water vapor in the night, channels it into the tub, and then the way that the tub is constructed, the plants grow through the drip, and that the moisture that feeds the plant is collected out of the air. This is, by the way, called Groasis. This is the word oasis with GR in front of it, and it's really marvelous working. So all I've heard from the Western press is how bad things are getting. But when you but when you look at what's actually being occurred worldwide, it seems like the Americans somehow are like 10, 15 years behind on everything.
These days, yeah.
And so, with the regaining of the desert, that shows that these big projects, now I don't know what's going to happen with the politics and the economics between the U.S. and China, because both of them could be in grave danger. And egos being what it is, I don't think that the Chinese are going to give in to Trump, and Trump is not going to give in to the Chinese, and so they'll just be a tit for tat. As they play their chess game, one piece falls after another, and one of those pieces is bound to be the economy. So in that regard, things are dangerous. But other than that, China, as a method of development with a benign dictatorship, looks like that it's actually going to be able to outperform capitalism. Because capitalism can exist within the structure of Confucianism, but when capitalism dominates the way that it does in a democracy, that there's enough voters who are foolish and therefore will listen to the lies that they have been believing their whole lives. And because of that, capitalism or money talks. And when money lies, everybody listens. This, by the way, is the golden rule that I've been telling my students about. I think we've talked about it before. You know, the golden rule of Jesus is to do unto others the way you want to be done unto. But there's other ways of looking at that golden rule. One of them is that he who has the gold makes the rules, which is exactly what's happening nowadays. But before that happens, he who makes the rules gets all the gold. That's the real golden rule, is that whoever's in power can make the rules, but once the guy is in power, then he's going to change that power so that he's going to keep and maintain their wealth. And the Americans have bought the lie. They believe it. In China, the Chinese don't believe the lies they've been told by the local government. Because, in fact, the local government and the national government are naturally at odds with one another. Why? Because the federal government appoints the local officials. Therefore, the local officials are now caught between the federal or the main Chinese government in Beijing and the local people. That system seems to work a whole lot better than the democracy in the United States, where big business lies to everybody in order to maintain their capitalistic position. But you see, the big money in China leaves China for different reasons than they do in America. The America wealthy, they put their money offshore so that they don't have to pay tax on it. In China, the wealthy people, they don't trust the yuan because it's subject to control by the government. And they have no say-so. Big money in China has no say-so over the government. And the reason for that is because of the parliament and government is making sure that enough of those officials that they put in power in the local areas were raised up as an entire cadre, kind of like an entire bureaucracy, so that they get more seats in the parliament than the business people do. And so that's how the government of China remains in control, is because they don't allow the business people to have that much. But here's the thing, the business people in China are very new, less than 50 years old. In the United States, old money is old money. You've heard of J.P. Morgan? Mm-hmm. He was getting wealthy as a pirate before the United States was even a nation. And yet J.P. Morgan, all their money was pirate money. And there's the railroad barons and the industrialists from the early times, Henry Ford, etc., like that, though he's not so much of a bad player as some of the others. But in any case, the money in America is old, and that's why it's gotten control of the government. So that same thing might happen in China. The big money might be able to take over the government, and then China, it won't matter anymore whether it's called communist or capitalism or democracy or whatever it is. It's big bucks calls the shots. And the problem with all of that is that everyone in those things are unhappy. Nobody's happy there. The only happy guys are the ones who can get out of that system. And that's a big problem because we've been told to be in that system, to stay in that system. Our parents want us to be successful in that system. Go, get a degree, become a doctor, become a lawyer, do something, like that. And what the parents are doing are setting their kids up for the same kind of suffering that everybody else is enduring. But these things go really, really deep inside. And, in fact, the guy that I was talking to before I called you back is in that dark night of the soul because that's the very issue or the way that he's looking at it. So how you would see that in Buddhist terms is in the Sabha-Asava Sutta, instead of looking at what's worthy of attention. In other words, we pay attention to things that are worthy of being paid attention to, is the Four Noble Truths of suffering and the cause of suffering, etc., like that. But when we're not paying wise attention, we pay attention instead to what will I become. In other words, how do we manage our there's a word for it. I forgot what the word was. But it basically means wanting things that we don't have. Ambition, that's the word I'm looking for. Okay. Ambition is supposed to be a really, really good word in the U.S.
Yeah.
But the student's supposed to be ambitious, right? And that part of that ambition is to climb the social ladder, to be something, to make mom proud of us. Which means to conform to the system, because if you do not conform to the system, whether that system is the American system or the Chinese system, or here in Thailand, the conformity is just to find happiness within your niche, within your network, your social connection that you were born into or find yourself in. You can't change it. In America, they demand you to change that you climb socially, you get more money, that you do this, that you follow your greed, that you have your ambition. And that's part of the reason why the Thai society, the land of smiles they call it, is a little bit more happier, because the people in general can find their happiness by looking for it directly within the situation that they have, to where the Americans have to find out the hard way that they cannot find their happiness through social climbing. That ambition leads to more ambition. It might lead to money, but it doesn't lead to happiness. It only leads to ambition of wanting more money. Get on the Forbes 400. Get on the top 200. Now I'm in the big club. Now I'm the richest man in the world. Therefore, I got to make sure I stay the richest man in the world. Let me go around hurting other rich people so that they don't get as much money as I do. And so that's the whole way. And if you look at Charles Koch, the poor man is just stuck. He is so pained. He's got, between he and his brother, they got, nearly $70 billion or something like that. Each one of them about $35 billion. Now, David is kind of over the hill. He's retired. He's a philanthropist now. But Charles, he is so greedy for that money, and he pours money into the politics. And then he gets angry at the politicians he pours money to because they don't give him enough. They don't give him enough. They gave him a big tax benefit, but now Trump is raising the tariffs, and Charles Koch doesn't like it. So now he's going to spend money on Democrats. I wonder how long he'll do that before he reverts back to the Republicans. But you can see all of the pain and the misery and the unhappiness that Charles Koch has. It's very, very difficult for us Westerners that see somebody that's that rich and that powerful to actually be in pain and suffering. But I see Charles Koch as not an enemy. I see him as a poor old fool. A poor old man, does not know how to manage his life, does not know how to manage his money. And he's miserable for it. And except for the money and the amounts of money, I'm talking about, 90% of all of the white men above the age of 60 in the United States. Unhappy because they were ambitious, and their ambition has proven to not satisfy. So now I've got a student who's in his early 20s who's now being kind of, I think, because he's been kind of deep into the Buddhism, that his parents are getting worried. They want him to stay ambitious. And so he's caught in this catch-22, because he's beginning to understand the Four Noble Truths. And the curious part is that in the 16 stages of insight, is that this dark night of the soul is at step 8, and the Four Noble Truths is at step 12. That doesn't make sense. It's only when the students stop with the ambition and start into the Four Noble Truths that it becomes an existential life crisis. Another quality of it is that to be ambitious is to take on in the OK Corral I'm not okay, but society is okay. And if I am ambitious, then I can be okay too. In other words, ambitious people are victims. Everybody plays victim role when we want help. Like my happiness depends not on the cars that I buy, but how much money I've got. And so the money becomes more important, and what happens is in order to get it, we start being dishonest, we lie. When we go into business, that's one of the big problems with it is that, in fact, in the West, it's considered a virtue. And that is information. Information is power.
Mm-hmm.
The Chinese have known about that since, 3,000 years with, I don't remember who wrote it, The Art of War.
Oh, what is it? Sun Tzu.
Sun Tzu, right. Okay. So in The Art of War, they talk about deception. If your army is big, you want it to make it look small. If it's consolidated, you want it to look diverse. If you're coming, you want them to make them think you're going, etc., like that. And so there's a whole lot of stuff that's built into that art of warfare. That whole mentality by the Middle Ages had become Machiavellian. And so that's what we have as a government in the United States, is a Machiavellian government being manipulated by Machiavellian capitalists who are not concerned with the truth, justice, or the American way. They're only interested in, I want to feel good, and the only way I know how to do that is by getting more money and hurting other people. If I can hurt other people, then that makes me feel good about myself. Donald Trump's very good at that. Stepping on other people to make himself feel good, rather than being able to see the suffering in the world. So this issue that we have of looking at our own ambition and recognizing that, if I'm going to be a Dhamma dude, then that means that I'm going to have to do several things. One of them is to come out of my lying and my cheating, because that's not going to create a unified mind. That I'm going to have to start to be honest with myself. But more importantly than that is that I've got to find out who actually I am. Because who I thought I was who I was told I was. And who I was told I was in relationship to others, in the hierarchy, and how can I climb, get better than other people, what labels can I put behind my name in order to feel good about all of that stuff. So, recently I saw an article on basically what it was. I forget exactly the name of it, but it was 7 really weird philosophers.
Okay.
7 really weird philosophers, and I didn't even read it all to see that philosophers are generally pretty weird guys. But one of the guys that was on that list was Bodhidharma.
Oh.
Okay. And you've heard some of the stories about him, like they asked him to give a talk, and he sat and meditated for an hour and a half, and then they got up and left and never said a word, and that really sparked an interest. He went to the Shaolin monastery, and they wouldn't let him in to teach, and so he sat outside their gate for 9 years until they let him in. When he came in, he completely reformed the place, that they had gotten lazy and whatnot. And so there was also a problem. They were cloistered, and they wouldn't come out of the temple because there was thieves in the area. And so Bodhidharma taught them what became eventually Kung Fu, just to protect themselves, so that they could travel between the monasteries harmless and unarmed, and still have a good chance of making it. Okay. So these are some of the things about him, but here's the point about all of these philosophers is that they become unique. You've heard terms like they listen to a different drummer drumming. You've heard that term? That we become unique. The Buddha talks about it many, many ways. One is to talk about the horn. Pardon? You froze up there for a second.
No, I can still hear you.
Okay. So the horn is an example. To be the rhinoceros horn, to go on your own. So we look at things like, all right, and we also have the both the Maha and the Chula Singha Sutta, number 11 and 12, as well as many places the lion is referenced. The Buddha sees himself as a lion, with the lion's roar. And in Sutta number 12 in the Majjhima Nikaya, it's talked about that the lion has 10 qualities, and the first 2 qualities are actually quite brilliant. The first quality of the lion is that the lion is the one who knows the possible as possible and knows the impossible as impossible. The second quality is that the lion knows Itia Papajayata, the cause and effect relationship, that action and the results of actions have to follow the law of Itia Papajayata, that it doesn't follow a magical law. That's the second. In other words, in Asia you have the law of karma, that when you believe in that, you say that, well, all action has to be either good or bad, and all good actions have to have a good result, and all bad actions have to have a bad result. The Buddha immediately pointed out, oh no, there are unintended consequences. Not every action is either good or bad. Most of the actions we have are mixed with mixed results.
Mm-hmm.
And so the law of karma is not correct. We have to have a better understanding of the cause and effect relationships of action and the results of the actions. Okay? So, when we see things like in the Sutra number 117, that the right noble concentration with its supports and requisites is how the Buddha refers to the Eightfold Noble Path, and this right noble concentration is called unification of mind. With unification of mind means that we're not going to be split or scattered. What are the things that will keep us from being split or scattered? Telling lies, harming others, being confused, being in doubt, following the herd, doing what you're told. That's a big one, doing what you're told. Why do we do that? Why do humans do what they're told? It's not merely fear of the consequences. There's something deeper in there. It's our social system, our social network that comes out of the nesting instinct. That if we're going to have a nest, we're going to have to get along in that nest. We've got to cooperate with each other. All right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that nesting instinct can be exploded to something really big. An example would be building a pyramid, or Angkor Wat, or even the city of Angkor. Because this is a very interesting thing I just saw on a video recently. Do you know about Angkor Wat? Siam Reap in Cambodia?
Yeah, I've seen pictures. I haven't been.
You should go. The place is still bigger than New York City. Most of the stuff that's left is all stonework, but originally you can see the city was built of wood, and it supported itself through, actually the Mekong River backs up and forms a lake every year, and then they plant that lake. And the reason it backs up is because of the Mekong Delta in Vietnam. So when the water rushes down the river, it can't get it through the delta, so the tributary river actually backs up and goes backwards. And that backing up of that river is actually what was the basis of Angkor, because it was really deep in the middle of a jungle and it was completely safe. All right, but it was also a Hindu civilization. And you can see all of the Hindu civilization all over the architecture. I mean, it's just one big Hindu temple.
Yes.
Until they were invaded by Buddhists. Not by Buddhist warriors, but by Buddhist monks. And in fact, the Buddhist monks took over, not taking over politically, but just the people began to understand and believe them, and it was because of that that the people themselves stopped paying homage to the king and stopped doing what the king told them to do, and Angkor actually fell apart because what kept it together was the Hindu mentality, and that the Buddhists, when they became aware of what was going on, they stopped doing what the king told them to do, and they lived their own lives happily. And that was the downfall of Angkor. Once that happened, the rest of the story is history, but it's not really blamable, but it was Thai, the same source of the monks, who eventually took the gold out of Angkor and took it to Ayutthaya. They're only to be taken by the Burmese a couple of hundred years later.
Yeah.
But they didn't get it all. Boy, did they not get it all. Thailand's got a lot of gold here. So, in that regard, we can see that, this is what happens when a society becomes Buddhist, is that the governments cannot be powerful because they cannot make people afraid, no matter how strong their army is. In fact, if it becomes Buddhist as a society, the army has to be very careful about their recruitment. Very careful about the recruitment. That's why it got built up the way that it did, is that in the old days, the young men had to do their 2 years in the army before they become monks. So they were in the army from the age of 18 to 20, and then at the age of 20, they become monks for a couple of years. If they did that the other way around, a lot of them wouldn't be going into the army.
Yes.
So, if we see things like that, what we really understand is that people who take on a noble view are not able to be controlled the way that people who have ambition. So, in other words, giving up one's ambition is freedom. Ambition itself is a bondage. And even at the point of hindrances of the mind, when the student is a very, very new beginner, before they ever learn how to clear out their mind, one of the things they see in there is wanting things. I want to be enlightened. Hear the victimhood in that.
That's such a pernicious thought.
It is, right. So I want to be enlightened is suffering.
Yes.
We have to get those kind of thoughts out, but eventually we have to rid, at a very deep level, ambition. And when we have family, friends, society, and other things like that are in direct conflict, active conflict. Mommy don't want Junior becoming some Buddhist monk or something. Guess whose other mama had to go through that? I had a 25-year-long discussion with Mama over this issue. And in the beginning where it started was she was a Southern Baptist who took her son, her daughter, and her husband to church 5 or 6 times a week, no matter how much there was any dragging and screaming along the way. We went to church. And so I was actually forced to go, and I was resistant to it, but I was not angry. I was actually, in a way, now that I'm thinking about it, passive-aggressive. Why? Because I really became kind of a Bible scholar at the age of 12. Because I was looking for all the stuff that was contradictory, confusing, etc., like that. So that by the time when I quit going to Sunday school, everybody was relieved. So that was one of the reasons why I didn't have a lot of friends in school, was because all of the people that I knew were, in that indoctrination. I was kind of lucky, I guess, to wake up at a very, very young age that there is more than what meets the eye. That Christianity is not what it's cracked up to be. And in fact, I remember at the age of 14, because by the time I was 14, Vietnam was really heavy, already into operation with draft and all of that kind of stuff. And the churches had to really struggle with that. And I think that the struggle that the churches were going through in 1962 and 1963 and 1964 was what, because they lost the struggle, eventually led to Christianity's downfall that's happening currently, with the last vestiges of that is that Christianity is now supporting Donald Trump. I mean, look at the moral high ground that they used to have that they have fallen into. Christianity used to have the moral high ground when they said, "Thou shalt not kill," but as soon as they start allowing their young men to be drafted and go to war, that was when the politics started. Now, for some reason, that happened in the 60s, but it wasn't an issue, I think, in World War II, because it was so obvious that we had to do that one.
Right. There was a sense of the righteous war going on there and preventing evil and so forth, that you could still feel good about it.
Right. And so, in that regard, there was not that much issue, but by the 1960s, when that came by, churches had to begin to struggle with whether you're going to teach the party line or are you going to teach the other party line, because they weren't in agreement. And patriotism seemed to have won out with the authorities and whatnot. But eventually, younger people stopped listening to that stuff. So I can see that part of it has to do with the internet, but the general point is education. That once you see something, let's say it this way, once you see a lie to be a lie, it's always going to be a lie so long as the same evidence is there. It's not ever going to go back to becoming the truth again to you. The only people who do that are fools. And right now it looks like the United States is a nation of fools who believe things to be true even though they have evidence to point that it's not true. In fact, I know of an American now. He lives in Bangkok, has for many years, but in Bangkok, the only Western English language station available is Fox News. And I know this guy is listening to Fox News. He oozes it. So he's been fed a steady diet for many, many years of nothing but lies. I wonder what things would be like if expatriates had MSNBC and CNN available to them. And I'm wondering why MSNBC or NBC and CNN don't do whatever they need to do to get their own broadcasts just broadcast internationally on the satellites, the way that Fox News is. So Fox is available everywhere. It's available in every big hotel in the world. But MSNBC and CNN are only available on the internet. They're not available on local satellites. The big satellite dish that we have, even Fox is not on it, but on True here in Thailand, Fox News is the only one.
Huh.
I wonder why NBC and CNN are not on here.
Beats me.
Maybe they just don't see the advantage of it. But in any case, getting back to this idea of taking an advantage, not taking an advantage, but being ambitious, wanting things, seems to go very, very deeply, right down to the core, because it defines who we are, what we want, what we are ambitious for, And what we achieve through our ambition is what defines us. But that's the problem, because that means that other things and outside forces, etc., like that is what defines us. And not only that, but it defines us inside a box that the society fulfills. But dudes like the Buddha, Bodhidharma, or Western philosophers who become their own man, they do not go through the ambition that society sets up. We have to be our own unique individual. That only you can define who you're going to be, who you are. And that's defined in this moment. So you can see that ambition is actually long-term. But happiness is right now. It's immediate. And yet look how many people spend how many years with their ambition, and their happiness is very fleeting. Because the ambition is always there. How can you and other students come out of this ambition? Well, one is by seeing the danger. See, in the beginning, I think everything is like this. You probably heard these before. That first comes the gratification. So we become ambitious for jobs, girls, or cars, or money, or whatever. And we see the gratification in there, but we're not able to see the danger. By seeing the Four Noble Truths and recognizing dukkha as dukkha, recognizing the source of suffering as the source of suffering, we begin to see that it's ambitious. Our ambition is dangerous. Once we see that our ambition is dangerous, then we can see the escape. If you do not see a situation as dangerous, then we do not plot an escape. It's only when we plot an escape is after we've seen the danger. So that's why seeing the danger is important. You have to see it. It's dangerous. Ambition is dangerous. This is the dark night of the soul, is beginning to see how dangerous ambition is. Now, that's not the only form of the dark night of the soul. In fact, the Christians do it in the sense of, let us say, making this statement. If there is no God, then what the hell am I doing? But if you go down just an inch, you'll see the question about what am I doing is I'm trying to fulfill my greed, my ambition. And what is my ambition? I guess at that level, my ambition is to get close to God. And what am I getting close to? Because there is no God. So, that's a big problem and that's why it would be called the dark night of the soul, is because the soul is in relationship to the God. But let us go a little bit deeper than that and recognize that, oh no, it's not the soul's relationship to God. It's the self in relationship to the society. And when we begin to see society itself as the danger, the very thing that I was thinking that I was going to get my gratification from has now become dangerous. That creates a snap. It's almost like a tanker going at full speed of 25 knots, and all of a sudden you hit the radar bang it on the side, and you reckon, oh no, I've been going in the wrong direction. 180 degrees out of turn, and not only that, but dead ahead are rocks. How can I turn this tanker around? That's the panic. Okay, so that's exactly what people get into. This is why we could call it the dark night of the soul, because it's the self rather than the soul, but it's recognizing that that there is danger ahead if we continue with our greed. If we don't put an end to it, we're going to be on the rocks. Perhaps even literally so. And this creates that internal strife that people have. Some can call it a depression. But in all cases, it's the position of the victim. And we need to change that attitude from the victim to the winner.
Yeah.
That it's okay for me to be a unique individual. It's okay for me to be a Bodhidharma. It's okay for me to be a Bodhisattva. It's okay for me to be a horn. That not only that, but that's the only way to go. To be absolutely a unique individual that is only subject to the vagaries of this present moment.
Makes me think of why I'm, in some ways, quite glad that I didn't pursue a PhD. In university, I was kind of in the cream of the crop group. You know, we were all taking graduate level classes, and I think everyone else in my close-knit cohort who did research with professors and so forth, all of the rest of them went to top 10, or at the very least, a couple went to top 20 universities in PhD programs. And I said, no. So I went and took a job, not even a particularly ambitious job. I picked a job that was less ambitious deliberately, just because I knew, although I wasn't very knowledgeable in the Dhamma at that time, I knew that if I went and took a PhD, that all that would do is just promote my sense of self. That would boost up my ego, and I knew that that was going to cause me a lot of suffering. And so I said, no, let's not do that. And even before I moved to Thailand, I had an offer for a very well-paying job. It would have been well into the six figures, and I said no. And letting go of that ambition is very transformative. Or even more recently, a good example would be, I'm not saying I've killed ambition or finished the task by any means. I think I've just done a few smart moves that kept me from going completely in the wrong direction. Even more recently, coming back from visiting...
Maybe not such a big tanker or going at such a high speed towards the rocks.
Yes. Going back from visiting my family in the West, there was a period of, I think, the first week or so where I was kind of unhappy. I was very dissatisfied because I came back and what is there? There's a bunch of weeds, a small house, no real certainty about income. And, you know, my mind had slipped a little bit back into the old conditioning. And coming back, I kind of had to re-encounter that. And I kept, saying, no, you can't take that position. You have to look at it and see the success in the here now. And it took a little while till I could finally get myself back in that spot. But once I was, everything was nice, everything was happy, and I could feel contentment and easily go and access that contentment whenever I wanted it and kind of stave off and say, no, there's no need to be dissatisfied with how things are physically or spiritually. And once you're in that position...
That's really excellent. That's why one of the things that I see that some people make is the mistake of, my ambition has been everything that's been keeping me going, keeping me alive. If I lose my ambition, then what's to become of me? Am I going to just sit? That in fact, there is a couple of laymen. One of them, his name is Citta, who was like the number one student of the Buddha. And another one, I forget his name, Hatha, let's just call him Hatha. I can send you the name of him later. He became the number two lay person of the Buddha. And where he met the Buddha was he was walking and he came across the Buddha laying down on the ground in cold weather under a thin robe. And so Hatha asked the Buddha, how are you, and that, and the Buddha, the conversation came to, well, I'm always happy. Even though I'm sleeping on the hard ground in cold weather with inadequate blanket, that's not the source of my happy. That whether I'm in a cozy room or on the ground, it's the same. When students read that, they say, oh, that means that if I lose my ambition, I'm going to have to sleep on the cold, hard ground. If I lose my ambition, what will become of me? Now, the question is that attachment to that cozy room? Or is it something even deeper than that? Because it's not just the cozy room, because the Buddha's already mentioned that, I can be happy without that cozy room. So the student, when he reads that, it's not about the cozy room. It's about what's to become of me if I lose my ambition. What's to become of me if I lose my ambition? It's about the self. It's a very, very deep thing. So a cozy room, that's only the, you could say that, well, that's the nesting instinct. If I lose my ambition, that's when it actually goes down to the point of the self-preservation instinct. Because my ambition is the preservation of the self. If I lose my ambition, that loses my ability to preserve myself. But you and I both know that that's not true. That the self preserves the self, or the self-preservation instinct keeps you breathing. You don't have to do every breath consciously. But in fact, we live in the stream of the Dhamma, and that's what makes it easy. Is when we're struggling to go upstream, going in the wrong direction. If we give up and let go, that doesn't mean it's going to be the death of us. What's to become of me? Oh, poor me, what's to become of me now that I have no ambition? This is really a deep look at what that dark night of the soul can be. For the Christians, the ambition has to do with a God that doesn't exist. But at a deeper level, it's the ambition that we all have for getting, let us say, into the society, which is not there. The society is not there for any individual's benefit. But it's kind of like everybody's for himself, and the sum total of all that greed, all that ill will, and all of that ignorance is what we call a society. And it's all built on instincts.
So I'm kind of glad that I think the path that I've taken, fingers crossed, will dodge any sort of a dark night of the soul. Simply because a number of the things I feel like I've been able to do everything with God, or than, ambitions for fame or wealth, and kind of deliberately saying, I'm going to push against that, and or giving up patriotism, saying, I don't feel some strong love or loyalty or preference. Not saying that I've gotten rid of all of these completely, but giving up a lot of them in the grosser forms and the bigger forms, and observing to see what's left after you say, I don't feel any need to say the United States is the best country in the world, or my hometown is the greatest, or I'm the greatest, look at how smart I am, or how high my salary is, and pushing away those things, saying what is left, and working with that is very helpful. And at the very least, I can say now that I don't feel like I've gone through any dark night of the soul in the process, but I didn't find myself up against the cliff. I kind of going on a nice gradual slope walking downhill, and there's no point where I suddenly, deep inside me, I say, oh no, my whole sense of self is under threat, and instead it's kind of eroding it.
That's exactly the way that the path should work. The path, when it's working correctly, the Buddha Dhamma, is good in the beginning, good in the middle, and good in the end.
Yes.
Okay, so if people are going through this dark night of the soul, that's because they're clinging to something. Another word is that they're foolish, because the evidence is that becoming non-ambitious is to your advantage greatly. The evidence points that. And all the evidence points that being ambitious is going to be painful. Sure, you might have good clothes and good house and good transportation and trophy wife and things like that, but guys who have that stuff are generally unhappy and want more. But it takes a real change of attitude to recognize that, just enough food, just enough housing, just enough clothing, just enough medicine is good to go. And after that, I am free. I am free of being to have to do what I'm told to do. In fact, I'm so free that I'm even free from being around people who tell me what to do.
Well, that's a real luxury.
Well, that's the horn. The solitary one. All right? If you are going to become your own man, if you're going to become a lion, in fact, I like to say it this way, if you're going to join the Lions Club, you got to be a lion. You got to be that horn. Not only that, but it's your nature, it's your calling to follow your own, and they have songs about it, you can talk about it, follow your own heart. That's not the right way to do it. Follow your own wisdom. Follow your own knowledge. Investigate what's the right way to go and proceed that way, not the way that you've been told to do, not the way the society says. In order to do that, you become unique. That every lion in the Lions Club is a unique lion. They're not joining the Lions Club because they're all alike. They're all unique.
Is the dark night phenomenon, could that partially be caused by too much striving on the spiritual path?
You can take the word on the spiritual path off and just stay with the word striving, and the word is certainly, yes, that's the source of suffering, is striving.
Because in the groups that I see talking about that, it are very much the ones that are kind of progress, goal obsessed, which is one way of looking at things, but it definitely appeals to the striving, the goal-oriented, the ambitious side of people, which is very strong in the West and in some people everywhere.
You can think of it as, in fact, the bull.
The
bull rather than the lion. The bull is the bull-headed one that's going to headlong straight forward. He already knows which way he's going, and the bull runs in like a freight train into a brick wall. That's the dark night of the soul. When the bull-headed one runs into the fact that his ambition is dangerous. They don't like it a little bit. It causes confusion, anxiety. And they need actually an invitation, come on over. You can join the Lions Club. You can be a unique individual that's like no one else. You have to define who you are. When you become a unified mind, your unified mind is going to be different than every other mind, whether that mind is unified or not. And it's certainly going to be different than the ununified mind, the one that does what it's told to do by the outside. And so that's, in one way, a loss of identity, because the way that we identify ourselves is by identifying with things on the outside. A really, really clear example of that is in the Sutta number 22, where the Buddha talks about the main thing that I'm thinking about is the banner. We have to drop our banners. What is a banner? An icon, a flag, an identity. Just recently, I was it came upon the screen the image of Chinese flag waving side by side of an American flag waving. Now, obviously, it was a video that had been cut and spliced to have the two flags together. But the question is how do I feel now about each of those flags as opposed to how did I used to feel about the flags? Because I was taught as an American to be afraid, skeptical, in competition with the Chinese flag. Now that I look at the Chinese flag, I don't have to hold my nose anymore. Then, in fact, I look at the Chinese flag both positively and neutral. And I look at the American flag at both negative and neutral. Negative in the sense of the Chinese, but in fact the reality is that I don't hold either one of them. I don't identify. I am not Chinese. I am not American. I am a human being without a flag. But at least I don't identify as being not communist, the way that the Americans do.
You don't want to be an anti.
Yeah, an anti-Chinese or an anti-American. No, I'm not an anti-American. I'm not an anti-Chinese. I'm just not a flag carrier. And that's how we can be free. So long as we identify with Chinese, and every time the Chinese do something good, we feel good, and every time the Chinese flag does something bad, we feel bad. We're subject to the vagaries of the flag, so long as we hold and identify with that flag, no matter what that flag is. If we stop identifying with it, then we're no longer affected by it. You can become free. So it's important in the beginning for Buddhists to become free of a god. Then we become free from society. Then we become free from all of the identifications that we used to have, and you can see where our ambition and our definitions of self are going to be now. They're going to be nowhere. Nothing to identify with. There is no me there. Which is exactly the phrase that Bhikkhu Buddhadasa uses. His favorite phrase, and the one he's most famous for, is nothing is worth clinging to is I, me, or my. And we cling to banners. Strongly cling to banners. So if people ask me if I'm American, the answer is, well, there is this an American passport. But the American passport does not make an American, even if the photos are resemblant. So by not identifying, we are free. By not identifying with the people who tell you what to do, then just because they tell you what to do doesn't mean that you've got to do it because you're not associated with those folks. You're free. You do not have to listen to anybody other than for investigation purposes to figure out whether they're saying the truth or not. And generally what we find is that they're not telling the truth. Either they don't know or they do know and they're trying to secure it. Here's something about that, and you've seen this in Thailand. You know that it was called at that time Business Software Alliance. Oracle, Microsoft, Novell, and several other companies were in Thailand causing a stink. This is back in the early 1990s. What were they causing a stink over? Exactly the same thing that 5 years before that the music industry was causing over copyright laws. And the same thing eventually happened over tobacco, to where you have American companies, either through Hollywood or through Silicon Valley or through North Carolina, P. Laurelite and the tobacco industry, coming to Thailand in wave after wave, several years apart, where the Americans are telling the Thai people, you've got to have laws that fit our laws.
Yeah, there are a lot of Thai laws that are mirrored off of U.S. law. Also, mirrored off German, too.
Yes, but there are several reasons why on the Americans, and one of them is the Treaty of Amity that allowed the U.S. to be in Thailand to support their wars.
Mm-hmm.
But the Thais eventually gotten rid of them, and about the only thing the U.S. now is doing in Thailand, aside from having possibly the largest embassy in the world, is also by having support for the military. In fact, the entire Thai Air Force is nothing but a bunch of old planes the American military left behind or are giving them from time to time. That's one of the reasons, by the way, that the Thai Army didn't like the prince becoming the king, is because he was part of that American flyboy stuff, the Air Force. But they eventually got over that. That was a long, long time ago. I don't think he's been flying recently. And so he's going to make a pretty good king. In other words, he's doing what he was told to do. I could see that during the funeral, by the way, that this guy is going to do what he's told to do. He's dressing in all the right clothing. He's bowing and scraping at just the right time. He's repeating exactly the right things to say, and he's fitting into this funeral El Perfecto because he knows that that entire 100 days of funeral was nothing but a trial for him. Is the army going to let him, or the monks going to let him become the king, or are we going to have a tragedy instead? And he stepped right up and bit the bullet. But in the process, what that meant was the United States lost even more of their power over Thailand. And an example also about that is that the Chinese really want to put a railroad through Thailand down to Singapore. Not a Thai railroad, one of the Chinese really high-speed rail systems. And the Thai military and the Thai government is balking. They say, if we're going to do it in Thailand, we're going to do it in Thailand. We don't want no Chinese money building a railroad that's going to replace ours. Do you know about that one? I don't know if you know that is point of politics at all. So the Chinese are deciding they're going to put a railroad down to Sihanoukville instead. And they'll worry on Singapore at a later time. So this whole thing has to come around to, are you going to be your own man, unified mind, following your own drummer, being your own lion, or are you going to be part of the society instead? And every Dhamma dude has to make that choice, and some of us make it easily, and some of us put ourselves through hell over that issue. Because that's the big one. Are you going to be your own man? And in the process, are you going to come out of being a victim and be a champion? Be a lion. Lion, not victim. Horn, not a victim. Horn, have no ambition. The Buddha has no ambition. That's what makes him a lion. Why? Because if we want something, then we are almost immediately a slave to that. I want it, therefore I've got to have it. And we think that it's I who own it. In fact, the really issue is that it's a burden to the I. That which binds us owns us. Is that not true? So if you own a house and the toilet needs fixing, who's got to fix that toilet? You got to fix the toilet. It's your house, right? In that regard, it's not your house. The house owns you. On occasion, people have asked me, not in Thailand, they never asked this question. I don't know what is even appropriate. But in the U.S., the question would be, is that your dog? The answer is no, I'm that dog's human. That dog owns me. That dog gets hungry and he says, you feed me, and I feed him. I'm the dog's slave. So that's how we learn to be free. We become free by not owning anything, because owning things is a delusion. There's no such thing as ownership. What is instead is the self is the one who is owned by the house, or the dog, or the society, or the ambition. We are owned by our ambition. We think it's our ambition, but it's not ours, it's just ambition. In fact, we probably picked it up off the street someplace. I remember, I was in Singapore, I remember it directly. I picked up a handkerchief. It looked like a perfectly good handkerchief. I picked it up off the street. I put it in my pocket. I took it home. I washed it. The next time I blew my nose, I was sick to death for 3 days. So much for ambition. Don't pick up snot rags off the street. They're dangerous. Very dangerous. That's what ambition is. And it seems like that the real danger is manifesting itself when the student figures out that he's going to have to give it up. That it's painful, and he's going to have to give it up, which means he's going to start going against the grains of society. He's not going to do what mom tells him to do. And that causes conflict. The question is, how can we deal with those people who do not want you to be a horn, do not want you to be a lion? They want you to be a sheep that follows the society around. Because we have to do that. It's not only you in your own mind that has to make that transformation, you've got to do it in public.
I think it would be nigh unto impossible to be fully awakened without going through a fair amount of outer transformation in the process. I think that's why the Buddha basically focused on people who had given up the householding life, not because it's impossible, but just because you're going to need some outer transformation in order to... Most people will need outer transformation before they can make much progress inside.
Well, Anathapindika is well known.
Yes.
But Citta is not, and Hatha are not well known. And yet Citta was mentioned by the Buddha as the foremost lay disciple, not Anathapindika.
Well, Anathapindika is well known because of monastery building, more or less.
Generosity.
That's why he's at the first of every suttas, when they're saying the Buddha was in such and such a place that
Jeta's Grove
comes in.
and Park, yes. He spent a lot of time there.
Anyways, tell me more about Citta.
Well,
because I don't know if I've read any suttas talking about him.
Okay, Citta is known to be the #1 student of the Buddha who was a layman. He was known to be a teacher of monks. He was known to be a non-returner. Now, let us say, at least in magical Buddhism, or the Buddhist religion, that enlightenment is so way up there that it drags way up there even Sotapan. So for someone to become a non-returner, that's a really, really high goal if you're into goal doing. All right? But when you recognize that, no, these are just states of mind, and that you recognize where he was, then you can see that that's why the Buddha gave him the status of non-returner, a label. If the Buddha was going to park it on me, I'd wear. I don't think I'd wear that label that was given to me by anybody else. I kind of prefer no labels at all. So I don't need to declare or claim anything. I can just be and teach the Dhamma and don't have to wear the label. But he was a wealthy man, and that he could teach the Dhamma. One time it was known in one of the sutras, I can look it up, I don't remember which one, that he came to a grove where monks were in a discussion, and the discussion that they were having was the distinction or which was worse or which was the problem, the sight or the eye that did the seeing. In other words, the nama rupa or consciousness was the point that they were discussing. And the Citta straightened them all out and says, no, it's not the sight, it's not the object, and it's not the eye, nor is it the seeing. It's the feeling. So that's where Citta was, and so that was where he was able to instruct the monks, is that they were off base. They had heard some of the things that the Buddha was saying, but they weren't able to put it together. That the issue is the feelings about what we see, not what we see, nor that we see, but it's what we do with what we see is the problem. So this is something that's known about him. He was also wealthy, and he supported a lot of monks with his generosity. I've come to find for myself that it's not the monks that I want to support. Why? Because especially here in Thailand, that once a Westerner becomes a monk, the Thai people are really going to take care of him. Probably not the way he actually wants to be taken care of, but he's going to be well taken care of, probably better than he would have been. All right? But it's the laymen who come to study the Dhamma that I want to support. And that Noah is doing that also. In fact, in Seattle, the group has gotten to the point of thinking about offering scholarships so that we can support guys to come over. They may not become monks. We know that, in fact, if they become monks, there's no reason for our group to support them anymore. They'll be taken care of by the Thai people. It's almost like we only have a window of opportunity.
Yes.
And so in that regard, that's where I would like to practice my generosity, just like Citta. Of offering transportation, offering advice on visas, offering information about which is the best temple, where to go, and actually offering financial support for staying there, if that's what they want to do. But very few of the Westerners that I have met are willing to deal with their ambition at that level. They only want to come to go check it out. They don't want to actually come and do it, though there are a few. I've got, for instance, Tun from Estonia has been over at Dam Kiem for years. I just sent him a check for a couple thousand baht. I regularly send money to Brenda so that she can support herself here. Non-ordained. I would rather support the non-ordained than support the monks, because the monks are going to get everything they need from the Thai community.
And then some. Because as soon as one monk or monastery is running low, rushes saying, we're...
Yes, there is that issue of reputation, that every Westerner comes with a lot of suspicion. The Thais have been there, done that, we've watched Westerners time and time and time again come in and not able to take it. But once a man proves himself that he can be a good monk, then all of a sudden you've got a lot of different monasteries who want him to come and stay with them.
Yes.
And so there's that transition phase, though, and that transition phase is for the guy to decide how important is my ambition. Can I, in fact, take on the spiritual life? Now, one of the ways that I look at it is that the Buddha, he used the term, I teach for future generations. Have you ever heard that phrase?
Yes.
Yes, that the Buddha teaches for future generations, that I teach for future generations too, that getting the supramundane Dhamma onto YouTube may mean 50 years from now, a guy or so may hear this tape and say, you know, that's my problem, my ambition. Let me start dealing with that. All right, so we don't know what's going to happen. But what we do understand is that it takes a major change in attitude for someone to want to give up their ambition. But just because they want to give up their ambition does not mean their only choice is to become a monk. Nor is it necessary once they become a monk, they stay a monk. That Western mentality is very much you made your bed, you got to lie in it kind of mentality. They look at it long term. You make a mistake long ago, you're going to pay for it for a long time. And they fail to understand that everything is temporary, that you can make a choice, you can get new information and change your choice. Because you're not making your choices based upon the society, you're basing it upon wisdom. You're basing it upon evidence.
I think very interesting. A while back, I prepared ordain with the intention of just for one rainy season. I ended up getting very, very sick and being unable to go and learn the ordination chant and so forth. But it was very difficult for me mentally to do it, even going in saying, I'm doing this temporarily and I have no personal issue with it, but I still had this mentality that I have to make it through this rainy season. I'm thinking, you know, everything else, easy. Monastery food, easy. Life, easy. Renouncing sex, and that's a hard one. I'm going, okay, that could be tricky. Or what if I just get bored? Because I know that on retreats, that's an issue. And if I find myself in a position where, you know, what if I get really, really bored, and instead of meditating, I'm just worrying about how bored I am, and, you know, and I get myself stuck in a rut. And my wife is just looking at me going, you're nuts. If halfway through you say, man, I really just want to go have some sex, or man, I am bored out of my brains, I am so fucking tired of just sitting all day. She's like, well, if that's the case, then you just disrobe and come on back home. Like, it's just fine. I was like, damn it, you're totally right. Even though she doesn't practice the Dhamma, it's just something that's a cultural value that's been instilled, and she just thought, you're just out of your mind. Why are you worrying about that? Like, of course you should try and stick around for the whole rainy season, but if you can't, then you won't. And I said, oh. And that's, you know, when I said, all right, and I hauled my ass over to the Wat, and I said, I need to learn some chants, what robes do I need to pick up, what bowl do I need to pick up, let's do this. And I started the process, and it ended up ending in me, you know, in the hospital, unrelated. Mm-hmm. But that was quite the learning moment. I would imagine that, you know, for me, it's one thing to say, I'm just going to up and wander, you know, 15 kilometers down the road to my forest monastery, but that's quite the jump for someone who still is full of all the regular ambition and cultural conditioning. That's a huge step. You know, now, and say, if I had the chance, I would, but I'm quite content practicing how I am now. I have all day to practice more or less, and I'm getting better and better at using just everyday things, using lunch, using breakfast, using weeding the garden to cultivate my mind, and I say, I'm okay. I'm just fine practicing how I am. Practicing as a monk would be good too. Practicing this is good too. But,
well, you can imagine how things got started for the Buddha. And I'm talking about the Sangha. How the Sangha got started was because he was teaching the Dhamma, and the guys got it. And so they started going with him. The original ordinations was ehipasiko, come.
Right. Yeah, it was just, come monk, and you became a monk because the Buddha said, come monk, and they're like, oh.
That was it. Right, all you need is a robe and a bowl. And so having the robe and bowl was all that was necessary, and you said that you've been ordained. That ordination is a long, long process with a lot of Pali. I had one time had that memorized.
Oh man, I never finished memorizing that. I got too sick before that happened, but...
Your video has gone horizontal.
Your video has disappeared, so I'm not sure what to say about this.
You did something and it went beep beep, and your video then made a big change. There you go, now you're back.
Well, that is my mindfulness bell. I set it on silent for a little period, and I guess the period of silence went off.
Okay, so the Buddha started the Sangha with his ehipasiko, and basically what he was doing was he was setting up an organization just to make it easy for people to leave home. That was the only thing he was doing. He was making it very easy to leave home. After that happened, there became a few discipline problems, and he started making rules that became the Vinaya, but it was always done in the moment. So if the last thing that the Buddha said before he died, or one of the last things he said was that it was okay to change the Vinaya because it was always a work in progress.
Right.
It was only after the Buddha died that it became frozen into some things that were quite ridiculous. I think the one that's the most ignored is taking a bath every 2 weeks. Yeah, there's a rule. Monks take a bath every 2 weeks, right, and nobody goes by that one.
Or some of the obscure ones, like some of the issues with carrying cloths or...
Mm-hmm. So basically the Sangha was started only for those who were looking to become lions. But now that the Buddhist religion has taken over, there's all other kinds of society reasons and motivations and whatnot like that. But in that regard, of the original intention of the Sangha, that is still very much available, not just to Thais, but to the Westerners, and they don't have to ordain. In fact, the ordination may, in fact, impede one's spiritual practice, just as you're talking about. That you'd be much better off sitting at home, practicing the Dhamma, and that the students don't even have to get their own home. That I've had people stay on my porch for weeks and months at a time, and many places around Wat Suan and Mok are available for Westerners to come and stay. Very little cost. The only thing they basically have to worry about is two things. One is making sure their visas are up to date, and the other one is getting fed. Those are the only two issues.
Well, and one thing I've noted is that as long as you have the legal ability to stay in the country and you are a sincere practitioner, I don't think you'd ever have a hard time finding food or a place to stay. The only thing that would be a major issue, I feel like, is a visa. And if nothing else, ordination solves that.
But that's not the only one. I can name you many places, some of which are commercial and doing their own thing, but many of the temples, all you need to do is get a temple to sign saying that you are here as a student studying Dhamma. or you were here as a meditator, and you can have that thing signed out. In fact, I got a year's visa for Bhikkhu Subharo out of Wat Soan Mok because of Bhikkhu Pramarut communicated directly with the embassy in Canada, the Thai embassy in Canada, and he got him a year's visa just like that.
I know that I was aware that you could get a year's visa. I wasn't aware that you could get a religious visa unordained. That's interesting.
Well, because it's not an ordination visa, it's an educational visa.
It's a religious visa.
Yeah, you can actually get a year's visa to come and study Thai language. But you have to pay the fee for the school to get that paper from them to study Thai language. So you've actually got to be a student.
That's an education visa. That's a separate one.
Well, this is the visa that we're saying is that you can get a visa, an educational visa to study Dhamma.
Oh, see, I was saying that there is actually a separate class of visa that exists that an abbot can help you with for religious purposes.
Yes, there is a monk's visa. I had one. But I was also able to get a monk an educational visa. He did not get a religious visa. He got an educational visa.
As a layman.
Lay people can get it also. And like I said, even you go on the internet, you can Google for educational Thai visa, and they'll tell you all about it. Basically, it's the letter in Thailand from the institution saying that you're here for study. And every 3 months, you have to go to the embassy and take that letter saying, I'm still a student here.
Classic 90-day hassle.
Well, that's the only reason, that's the only thing. And I'm really glad that we're having this conversation because we're both two Westerners living in Thailand for the long haul, and we know how easy it is. But you can imagine the Westerner who has never been to Thailand, it's almost gut-wrenching to think, I'm going to drop my ambition and come to Thailand and hang out with nothing to do and no place to go and enjoy the heck out of it? That sounds very frightening.
I mean, to be fair, the visa process is certainly frustrating. But it's just that. It's frustrating, and, officials may try and pull your strings here and there and cause you some hassle to see if they can get some extra money out of you, but if you just stick with it, it's not actually difficult, nor is it. At least once you...
It's not even frustrating if you're not in the habit of frustrating yourself.
Yes. If you have the right mindset, it's not even frustrating. And the initial difficulties of getting the non-term, the non-immigrant visa, once you have it, renewing it and the 90-day stuff it's not that difficult. It's just, it's a little bit of work, but it's not that expensive.
It's actually very easy if you're staying on the mainland over at Wat Soan Mok. Surat Thani immigration is very, very amenable. Especially one of the women, one of the officers there is a student of Bhikkhu Buddhadasa, and she's very amenable. All you have to do is prove to her that you're at Wat Soan Mok, and visas become really easy.
So you're just adding more things onto my list that says, if you were a serious student of the Dhamma, you can live and die in Thailand with support from society without any legitimate needs to be worried about your life.
Exactly. And you have enough of us who have enough money that's extra. So I'm willing to support 2 or 3 people.
I bet to make the case to Thai lay practitioners that they all also do not need to be worried, and that they can let go of some of their ambition for the same reasons, and they don't even have to worry about visas or anything. And they know more intimately than us Westerners that you can be supported in the monastic community, even as a non-monastic.
Well, there is the story about one monk who disrobed on a regular basis to help his family with the harvest, and then when the harvest was finished, he'd come back and become a monk again, and the Buddha allowed that. I think that particular story that he ordained 7 times, and so that's the limit now, that you can ordain and robe and disrobe 7 times. It's more practical 3, I've been told. That 3 times. Okay, 1 in the beginning, 1 in the middle of life, and then 1 at the end of life. When you're an old man, you come back and ordain again. And in fact, I carried a false piece of information around for a long time, thinking that there was a limit, that you had to be 55 years old, and a lot of people believe that. But now I know for sure that many of the Upajjhayas will ordain without that 55 age limit rule. The idea is, the Thai word is mingda, which is ink fish, plamuk. You know, the mingda is cuttlefish. It's like a squid. And that how they mate is one mingda or cuttlefish will ride on the back of the other cuttlefish, sometimes for long, long periods of time. And so the Thai have them in the idea that an old man should not become a monk because he will never get to the point of being able to teach or to be of support, that he'll always need to be taken care of. And that's the reason why these 7 illnesses are not allowed. But these are all later things. But even in the ordination, old age is not one of them. But emphysema, tuberculosis, smallpox, all communicable diseases, there's 6 or 7 of them that are in the ordination. They ask you, do you have this? Nate Bante. Don't have it. I do not have emphysema. I do not have tuberculosis. I do not have smallpox. I do not have cholera. That's one of them. And so, but there is no restriction for old age. And that, in fact, in Thailand, the idea, and it happened at Wat Suan Mok, I imagine this happens in many of the temples, that the old man will come and build a kuti for himself, live his life out. 15 years later, after he's dead, there's a free kuti for another monk. The kuti that the old man builds will outlast him.
One thing that I've noticed is that in some cases, when monks get old, some will kind of be pushed to leave There is, and I have met people who were more than their fair share of gray hair or something. You can overcome the cultural concern that you were ordaining because you're old and you can't take care of yourself and you're just going to be a burden. As long as you overcome that concern, I don't think that there's a problem.
It's a mixed bag, and it depends upon who the caregiver is. An example is that there are actually 2 hospitals for monks in Thailand, and that some of them go there to die. Others of them, it's a case, so it has to do with what family member is going to be able to give the support so that the man can stay a monk, live in the temple, and still get the adequate care that he needs. And that one of the ways of taking care of that is by having a nephew to join and become a monk with the sole intention of taking care of his old uncle. I know of cases like that. Actual cases. I know of another case, that by the way was Lao. The other case is that the old monk was the abbot of the temple. But he decided to disrobe because the best care that he could get was from his family, and the women of the family saying they're not going to take care of him because they're not going to touch a monk. And so he disrobed in order to be taken care of, and yet there was still a huge number of people who would come and visit him even after he had disrobed and was not a monk. Everything about the room that he was in looked like he was a monk and in a temple. And so he only officially disrobed so that he could get the women who were in his family to take care of him and give him the care that he needed, while in all the other respects he still remained a monk. He was not the temple abbot, but he was still highly regarded by the Khmer community. This was in Lexington, North Carolina, that happened. The screen is frozen again. Hello, Skype. Well, I guess we might sign off if it's going to be completely frozen like this. I don't see it coming back. So I'm going to finish our conversation, though we probably got other things that we could say to each other. I really enjoy having you come on. We can talk at a fairly deep level. So I'm going to sign off now, and we'll see you later.